Well, gentlemen, I think we've had some great discussions about what we've been talking, in terms of delivering capabilities. And now we're going to be talking about the business value of multi-domain integration with Zero Trust. So we wanted to set the stage about some of the potential outcomes that can result from the multi-domain integration stories that we've been telling over the past couple of sessions. And so really, if you think about the realities of multi-domain within the government world, there are some different constraints that you might not see, certainly on the commercial side. Number one is something called technology business management. The capital planning and investment controls that all agencies must use to submit their budgets are now tracking financial spend data in a way that's never been done before. Cost pools lead to IT tower expenditures, which deliver services. And those services are intent upon delivering capabilities to the federal government so that they can then produce the outcomes to deliver the mission and business expectations of the constituencies that support them. And that ability to deliver it is paramount, and for now, going forward, they'll be able to track that year over year over year and hold people accountable. That has not been possible before this year. Number two is in the area of customer experience. We've seen the President's management agenda released in November, an executive order coming out of the Biden administration in December, all focused on enhancing experiences of citizens and the employees. So the ability of a multi-domain end-to-end architecture becomes critical as you look at it from that way. Full stack optimization, as we like to call it at Cisco, as opposed to full stack observability, which is normally done. How does an application perform in the application environment, the infrastructure environment, the network environment, the security environment, and being able to deliver that capability so that you have basically great capabilities in that area, and you look at automation and orchestration and the ability to line that. So again, abstraction that we've talked about in this area is critical for multi-domain efficiency across those environments. And of course, we've been talking about Zero Trust and Zero Trust architectures as a primary way of doing it. So you have the executive order, OMB 2209, what's coming out of CISA, what's coming out of NIST, are all key fundamental impacts in that area. And in particular, if you look at the executive order, there is a critical element that's highlighted not a lot of people focus on, and it's about throughout all aspects of the infrastructure, agencies must consider Zero Trust. And then finally, if you're really looking at it from a multi-domain end-to-end architecture perspective, that has ramifications for IT modernization. So whether you look at modernizing with multi-domain outcomes in mind, that's how investment should be done. That's how agencies should be going forward. Now, we've talked a lot about, as we come back now to Zero Trust and the focus in that area, about what are the economies of scale that we can deliver, what are the ways to horizontally and vertically do that. I know, Jamie, you've had some incredible insights in that area.
Thanks. Yeah, I've actually built modern cyber around three core principles: integration, agile, and Zero Trust. And all three of those, especially what we've gone through today, kind of highlight the big points of the business outcomes associated with delivering agile infrastructure, making it programmable, and make sure that you can get better security outcomes.
Jeff, what are your thoughts on that particular area? I mean, we've talked about labor savings, we've talked about the efficiencies of infrastructure, because that the infrastructure can now dynamically optimize itself for scaling up in workloads, for various considerations. Things like, Cisco uses Intersight, full stack optimizations, end-to-end approach. To me, that has dramatic ramifications for how federal agencies can achieve the outcomes they're looking for.
I think it does. I think that the way that we've been doing business historically isn't sustainable when we talk about transformation as a whole. I think that what I've seen is when it's not sustainable, technically spend happens, but then things just die on the vine, right? And I think what we've seen, like you've talked about, even with Vitara, et cetera, that's not tolerable anymore. For things not to actually get implemented that are purchased, and that's reasonable, right? And we don't want that, as citizens. So I don't know. I think that we just have a way to modernize very quickly now, and that's the big part of the story, I think.
Yeah, and I think if we can eliminate the technical debt, there could be major ramifications. And we had a conversation talking about data centers that could approach that technical debt issue and actually do an as-a-service model in a new way that could have tremendous ramifications for cost effectiveness of federal agencies.
Absolutely, and you brought up a great point earlier that I want to emphasize, which was thinking about Zero Trust for all of your infrastructure. And there's a lot of infrastructure in the data centers today that are capable of providing either the analytics, the information, or the entry points to implement decisions around zero trust. And so I think if agencies are able to leverage their existing investments and be able to optimize the output of those, they're going to see tremendous capability increase and cost savings.
That's a great point. I mean, one of the things I have coming up in my conversations with CXOs almost every single time is, how are you taking advantage of the Cisco technologies that you have today? And I think I have yet to encounter one that is fully utilizing all of that. And the ability to walk in and say, you know, you already own these products. Let us help you optimize the outcomes that can come from that, has received a rousing, almost standing ovation every single time we've done it. And I think Cisco is one of the few companies that's really looking at that. There was one CIO that was even saying, you know, the reason I'm meeting with you again and having a deep dive in these areas is because you didn't come in last time and try to sell me anything. You said, how can I make the products that you've already purchased better? Yeah. And that blew his mind because he had not encountered that from any other vendor.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a case of where you can spend a lot of money to get a system that you think is potentially going to solve your zero trust requirements, but it's not necessarily one product. It's a paradigm shift. It's a philosophy of not trusting things, implementing, and getting as much information as you can on the endpoint, the user, the network, whatever it may be, to make those decisions. And what better way to do it than the underlying infrastructure that it's already running on top of?
The key here is it doesn't matter what you buy. It's how you actually utilize and implement. And I think with multi-domain, what we've tried to kind of go through has been all about, if you put the right pieces together, the outcome is greater than the individual parts. Absolutely. And from creating some of these great work experiences, you get better outcome for the end user, better outcome for the administrator, consistency and better security outcomes. Many people kind of look at the problem space individual requirement by requirement. And when you actually bubble it up to the higher level, it actually becomes extremely attractive to be able to move the transformation or digitization forward.
It is. So let me ask you a question. Why do you think folks are reticent to move to this type of infrastructure?
I'll tell you, my answer is culture, right? And I think that we organize, and if you look at most federal agencies, you have an organization within the CIO's office that's focused on applications, one that's focused on networking, one that's focused on data center, one that's focused on cloud, and they don't merge that together. I was with a CISO, for example, and I think this is why zero trust is so important, because it can be kind of the discussion topic around which you can break down these walls. And she said, Steve, tell me about a Cisco product that I'm not fully utilizing. And I said, when was the last time you thought about a switch? She goes, no, I meant a security product, Steve. And I said, exactly. A switch is a security product in a policy enforcement process. And she goes, and you could just see the light bulb going off. And all of a sudden, I think this is the third largest federal agency, there was a sea change in how that agency began to view how they were going to bring together the CIO's organization. And since that time, we have had multiple discussions with the CIO. Another great example. They bought 3 products of Cisco that together produce an outcome for full stack optimization. They had bought the product for a particular feature in the data center. They had bought something in the network environment, and they had bought something for application performance within another one of the divisions of USDA. And as a result, they basically came down and said, we, if you stitch them together, can have an outcome that is fundamentally different than just the products being done and used in that area, because they're designed to work together. Multi-domain orchestration producing the outcomes that we discussed at the top of this topic, the top of this discussion. And it opened their mind, and it said, that is the kind of strategic partner we want.
I live in Florida, so I like to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And the reason why I like to say it that way is, yes, the investment a lot of times is looked at as problematic or challenging, but the end result ends up being a framework or architecture or strategy that actually is scalable and workable much better than what you had in the past. And I think there's a lot of boundaries that create challenges, whether it be procurement or operations staff or engineering staff or enterprise architecture, that kind of bubbles up or creates challenges. But at the end of the day, you have to look at this problem holistically. I think zero trust is actually a good way to even break down those borders and ask the questions like, what would happen if this application was compromised, if this open source software was a problem, or if this network switch was counterfeit? How do you prevent against these things? So just by thinking about it and then taking the right architectural approach, you're now in this place where the actual organization can move at a much more rapid technology rate, and that's really the goal.
And I think agencies have a tough time with this, right? Because they're being asked to reduce OpEx while at the same time being asked to deploy a transformational technology shift with zero trust, right? But I think as a Lean Six Sigma guy, as an example, and when you're manufacturing background, pursuing continuous improvement, the two don't have to cancel each other out. And I think that's part of the important story. Right, you've made this purchase in these products, but going back to the full stack optimization piece, right? The holy grail for me has always been end-to-end performance monitoring. It's interesting how that came out in like 2007, 2008, and then it kind of died on the vine in terms of like a holistic approach. What have you seen mostly in that regard?
So going to the why are agencies reticent and why haven't they gone towards the zero trust architecture? It kind of goes back to the OMB mandates. They've had a lot of these come out, a lot of executive orders with no funding behind them. And so a lot of times they take a look at their budgets, they take a look at their roadmap and their vision and what they need to do to actually meet their mission. And they say, well, if they're not coughing up the money, I'm not implementing this. But like Jamie said, it doesn't matter what you buy. It's a culture change, this zero trust. It's a different way of looking at security and the way you implement it. So I think every agency can start today by looking at the tools they have, looking at their policies, their processes, and they can start implementing some of the facets of zero trust. And working with great partners like Modern Cyber, CTG Federal, or Cisco, they can come up with solutions that will meet the requirements and get them further towards their goals.
Sure. The only other thing I want to add there is everything is much easier when it's driven by data. So being able to have the visibility that we talked about in the beginning, even if you're not transforming data center or campus or WAN networks, just by having telemetry and context data, which the funny part is most people already have vulnerability management or patch management. So when you start to put together some of the data points, it can actually inform the long-term strategy for an organization and help prioritize when there is funding and making sure that everyone's kind of moving in the right direction towards that zero trust future.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head, the data. And that's why, we started with a discussion of technology business management. They have never been held accountable for before. I was dumbfounded when we were doing a non-attribution interview with a federal leader. And they said, if I need a data call on this, I put it out. 2 years later, the same topic and issue comes up. The data was not kept. It's a new issue and a new data call goes out, and they're not being held accountable for what they had done in those intervening years. With the arrival of TBM and the mandates within CPIC for getting the budgets, they are now being tracked. And that is something that with FITARA, with everything else the federal government looks at, can hold them accountable, and they're thinking about it for the first time, that awareness.
And oftentimes the budget is there if they can prove that they can deliver on it, right? And that's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. Here's one of the most interesting things. The Technology Modernization Fund was created in order to help agencies modernize, to eliminate that technical debt that you talked about. Yet it hasn't been fully utilized. And I think in the beginning it was partially because, it was directed towards CIOs, and yet it was more of a financing mechanism, so maybe it should have been marketed to CFOs. But at the end of the day, there's been $1 billion allocated, and I think the matches so far are under 200 million. So they're looking at, the next budget cycle and how much they're going to fund, and it hasn't been fully utilized. So even when there are opportunities available, there's still something that's preventing agencies from embracing that and engaging it. And I think part of it is an understanding of what the realm of the possible is. That's why I think the series that we've done is so valuable in helping folks understand that a multi-domain architectural approach is foundational to their success, not only for zero trust, but for performance, for outcomes, the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, and it's tough, right? I mean, we did some pretty detailed Lightboards on the subject. Yep. If you go from 0 to 100 in terms of looking at these things and just thinking, this is too much of a paradigm shift, I can't imagine, just going from 0 to full delivery on that.
Yeah, but that's something I love to do, right?
Yes.
Is there's absolutely a good way to methodically and in a very risk-adverse way introduce this technology so that the risk to operations, the risk to production is not high. And I think that's where you know, different engagements, whether it be looking at the strategic side or the tactical side.
Yep.
How do I move just 10% forward?
Yep.
Even though I can't get to 100%, what's my goal for 90 days, 180 days, 365 days? Because if you don't start now, it'll never happen.
And you can show immediate ROI with most of these solutions. I mean, immediate. We talked about collapsing tools into, a single pane of glass, and I mean, I've seen that across many agencies. Mostly, you've had a lot of success on the Intersight side, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Having a tool that can bridge across the different facets of the organization and bring that information and correlate it together and provide some additional context, whether it's security advisories and what their severity is that are impacting the infrastructure that you actually own. And it's a lot of times that's real-time data that's being collected by all of their customers, under the Cisco umbrella, and seeing, hey, what infrastructure do you have? What vulnerabilities might exist, and what could you address very quickly?
Yep.
And we've talked about this. It's really about visibility, understanding what you have, what is the performance, how can you then act upon that because the analytics support it. And then think about, if I got the analytics and the visibility, then how do I bring automation to bear in order to start improving the environment and then orchestrate that as you clearly have laid out in the discussions. I now have the ability to be able to effectively deliver the outcomes that they're talking about if you start thinking of them in that way. And guess what? We've just identified the cross-cutting capabilities of zero trust architecture as defined by CISA, as defined by DISA, as defined by the agencies. And I think when you start thinking about that holistically, that end-to-end architecture, I think it helps. And I'd say there's one other point, is that most organizations, most companies, most vendors aren't thinking about it that way because they focus in a particular silo. I'm so proud to be at Cisco because we think about things more holistically. We're a leader in many different Gartner Magic Quadrants, many different Forrester Waves, and it makes us think across the domain. So it's a multi-domain approach to how to do that. And I think that is something federal leaders are looking for. Who are the partners that they can turn to help them go through this morass of technologies and deliver an outcome they're looking for in a way that makes financial sense, business sense, but most importantly, mission sense?
Yeah, no, this is all. So you're talking about business outcomes. What would you say for agencies that are looking for specific business outcomes? Do you have maybe a top 2 or 3 that you tend to see desired business outcomes?
Yeah, I think that with the recent emphasis on CX, customer experience, that is top 1. They've got an executive order, they got the president's management agenda, things that they're being tracked upon. So how can you ensure that performance is there? And I think if you start to think about it from a performance standpoint, well, what's the security around that? I'm going to be dealing with PII in most cases. I'm going to be dealing with information that's sensitive. So I have to embrace zero trust as part of that discussion. So I think, again, government agencies respond to what leadership in the government mandates that they do, even though they're unfunded in most cases, and begins to drive them in that direction. I think the other thing is if you take a look at the broader ecosystem of what they're trying to do, each agency has a mission and a focus area that the leadership cares about. And increasingly, that's about their own employees and how are they going to retain the employees to be able to deliver that. And I think the more that we can tailor the stories to what that particular agency is focused on, the better it's going to be. Just recently, I've expanded more into state and local and some communities, and we're looking at communities reimagined and how can we help each community evolve. Every community is different within the individual things they care about. But when you look at the top 10, almost every time, all of the elements they're focused on are within the top 10. So if your capabilities can be adapted to all of those outcomes because you're delivering an end-to-end multi-domain approach, you now have solved the biggest problem they have, which is helping them future-proof what could be coming down the road because the infrastructure, the technologies can handle it.
That's a point that I like to bring up quite a bit. It's more about preparing for the unknown, like whether it be dynamically addressing new device types, new use cases, new users, new partners, business partners, technology. All of these things, when done in a ad hoc, individual by individual basis becomes unsustainable.
Sure.
And we talked a little bit earlier within the series about how hard it is to actually deal with the amount of data that's being produced. Building the right architecture with the right capabilities is what's going to allow you to say yes as a security architect or operation to a new piece of technology that's going to help move the mission or the business forward. And to me, that's what this is all about, is stop trying to be reactive and be proactive in setting the right architecture for the future.
You know, and I want to foot stomp this because I think this is really critical. If you asked people 5 years ago, tell me about security and how it helps enable your business, you would get almost a universal response: security is a pain in my butt. All they're doing is saying, no, I can't be done. So if you're thinking about it from a multi-domain perspective, you're solving that problem, and that security becomes an enabler. It protects the organization. It protects the data that we need to worry about. And that attitude, I think, is every bit as important in bringing about a cultural change, because the technology can handle it today.
Absolutely. I think this, we talked about streaming telemetry and analytics. I think that's the other important thing, right? Because historically, IT has always been a cost center. Well, going back to data driven, the fidelity of the data that we're collecting with streaming telemetry on all the planes is extremely valuable to the mission and the business. Not just to IT. And all of a sudden, IT is becoming a sensor for the business in terms of gathering all of this actionable information. I saw that with a trucking company that I used to work for, right? With BI and gathering all that information, scraping it off the network. And this was years ago. But, there was a truck lane, believe it or not, from one city to another that had never been profitable for any of the competitors, and based on the BI that was being gathered from the network, after a couple of months and kind of figuring out how to crunch that data, we got a call saying, hey, that lane was profitable. Propagate this to the whole company, worldwide. And sure enough, they survived the last gas price crisis because of that. And the same thing can be adopted in federal. IT isn't just an afterthought. Like I said, a cost center. We can enable the mission at a much higher level than we do now.
Yeah, arguably the agencies have realized that today with having the stay-at-home orders and more people working remotely, shrinking office spaces. The need to have a resilient IT infrastructure that can enable access for users remotely securely has become top of mind. And I think that has changed the view of IT in the eyes of the CEOs, the secretaries and directors of these agencies.
The only thing to tack on to that is that's where multi-domain and experience matters to me from a technologist standpoint, because essentially I should not have a different experience, different security policy, different way of doing my job if I'm remote or on premise. And the problem that we see day in and day out is that people actually have set it up that way, where it's completely different technology, controls, experience for the end users. They're expected to realize how to do their job differently remotely versus on-prem. So along with Zero Trust security and adding some of those capabilities, getting consistency with experience is where multi-domain, I think, really shines. Same thing if I go to a branch or a remote site as if I'm at corporate headquarters or at home.
And that's a beautiful point, right? Consistency of security policy, consistency of deployment. We talked about software image management, right? We've talked about like STIG compliance. So we can achieve continual compliance, status. Pretty much daily reports simply by doing this, right?
Not just daily, but real time. When something happens, it's proactive. Like that's really the future that we want to see, right? Is to be able to say, this is not something I need to wait for your user base to call in and tell me there's a problem. There's predictive outcomes associated with the data that we're gathering. And then as soon as we see something happen that should be either notify the right individuals or take the right appropriate action.
That's powerful.
And I think we're at a perfect time here where we have the technologies now that are so capable of doing it, and then we have a scarcity of cyber personnel, the people that they would normally rely on. And I think that by offering solutions that can take advantage of and leverage the machine learning capabilities that can be trained with algorithms to help government agencies succeed in what they're trying to do, IT no longer becomes a cost center, but an enabler of the organizations and agencies' mission. And I think it's that mindset that's so important, and it's something to be proud of. The technology is supportive of it, and we, as the partners of those federal agencies, I think have an obligation to help them do it. And one of the reasons why I was so happy to participate in this session and go through these deep dives, because the technology is there, the need is there, and there are requirements, mandates that are out there for implementing zero trust security. And to your point, Jamie, it can be that enabler that helps unify an outcome in a multi-domain environment.
No, this is exciting stuff, and I'm glad that we all linked up about it because it's an exciting story. But the reason I think it's exciting for those of us at the table is because we know how powerful it is.
We know how bad that pain is before.
We know how bad the pain is.
That is the point.
And really, it's wanting to see organizations stop taking the extremely difficult path. There is a better way, and that's what's so difficult here. Is like I told you the story earlier about ransomware. It pains me to see ransomware hit more than one machine. Why? Because there's free policy that you can implement that will block 98% of the lateral movement associated with ransomware propagation. How much money does that cost in capital expenditures? Zero. It takes time to actually plan and implement the new tools or technology. But in this case, do the work, understand it. There's plenty of people out there that want to help and see some of these organizations take the correct steps towards better outcomes.
Great point. Yeah, and that's why we developed, for instance, the IT Manhattan Project framework, right? For that very reason. I mean, architecturally, we have the secret sauce, we have the solution, and we have a reliable, repeatable way of doing it. It's like if you have the cure for a disease, you just want to tell people about it. But no, I appreciate all of you guys being involved in this, and I hope that we continue, pushing this out there because it's a great story and it provides answers to a lot of issues out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Glad to be a part of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.